What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today's going to be diving into something a little bit different. I know we're a few months out from rotation, but someone kind of brought up an idea that I kind of saw in one of my last videos about looking into the future and looking at possibilities of what decks could be popular in the format as a whole. Sometime during the summer, they've done it the past couple years. MTG Arena has launched a format that is dedicated to that post-rotation magic, where we play with the latest and greatest, and we get to kind of test things out, kind of see what decks we could build with the limited card pool we have for standard. I'm not sure if they're going to do it this year, as we really don't have a summer set to kind of go alongside of it like we typically do in the past. But like I said, I decided to take a look at some of the top meta decks in the format and look at possibilities, whether or not some of these meta decks can stay around when it comes to rotation, whether or not they'll fall out of place. Is kind of more speculative, as I really can't test the decks and kind of see how they would compare against other decks in the same general ballpark. But I'm going to take a look at some of the top meta decks, kind of make some adjustments to them in their deck list, and kind of see whether or not they can, survive rotation and be able to still be playable in the future. With that being said, let's just dive into the decks and let's just talk about it. So the first deck up here on the list, as you can see, is a Rakdos Sacrifice deck. Rakdos Sacrifice, for the most part, has a lot of cards from Kamigawa, a little bit here from Crimson Vow with some of the vampires that create the blood tokens. But for the most part, the deck itself, outside of some lands, and I think depending on what version you look at, may have some planeswalkers in it that come from the D&D set, overall really doesn't lose too much. The one thing I will say that maybe the biggest impact here that it actually does lose is currently we don't have a way to sacrifice a creature we control to draw cards, get treasure tokens out of it, as we lose that functionality in rotation. As you can kind of see here in the sideboard, I actually took out, these are the cards that we did lose from the main deck. The version I pulled had Deadly Dispute. This is going to be the key card I think that's going to be the most felt, as this card's not going to be easily replaced, as this is a spell, and the only way we can replace it is with a creature. But definitely a card that will definitely feel the ramifications of in the deck, but whether or not it'll be big enough impact to kind of throw the deck off. We also lost Lil Spider Queen. The reason why this deck she's so good with this deck is because we're sacrificing creatures to create our artifact creatures, and she will essentially gain loyalty every time we do so, and then allowing us to create spider tokens as well for blockers, which also have reach and menace, which was definitely very good there. Outside of that, we essentially just lost our 2 creature lands from the mana base, and we also lost our Blightstep Pathways, which may slow down the deck because we'll have to play some more of the dual lands that we currently have from Crimson Vow with the Haunted Ridges, and maybe play a few more basics than we normally would have in the current version. But overall, when you look at the deck list, nothing's really super changed. Like I said, the only notable card that I added is going to be the Dockside Chef. It's a 1 mana 1/2. We tap 2 mana, we can sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and we draw a card. Is that going to be able to replace a Deadly Dispute? I'm not sure, but it'll give us another avenue to get some more value out of our, our sacrifice in the deck overall, which definitely could be a good thing because, maybe you don't want to just ping your opponent for 1 point of damage with the Anvil. Maybe you want to get a card draw out of it, and this will kind of be our option for 2 mana. We can do so. Outside of that, I think a lot of versions, went away from this Skokusin Smelter. I think we can always add him back. He's definitely another card that can benefit us in this deck, make us a little bit more on the aggressive side rather than be more the mid-rangey, slower sacrifice deck. Because at the beginning of our combat, each turn we can pay 1 life and we can sacrifice an artifact, and we can create a 3/1 artifact construct, which is definitely very good as well. And like I said, most of the other cards in the deck didn't really get change for the most part. I mean, you can always play around with the pieces. As you see here, I feel like the deck almost looks very similar to a deck you would find today. I even think this deck could still perform very well in the regular meta that we currently have. It's definitely going to be a deck that I think is still going to have some lasting effects. Could be possibly a top deck in the meta, as I do think these slow drain decks are definitely very, very good. And it's definitely an aggressive deck when you want to be, because it does play cards like Ob Nixilis as well. Definitely a cool deck. Definitely can't wait to see what the future holds for like a sacrifice deck. But with that being said, let's move on to the next one. Another interesting deck that we have here is a mono blue Delver deck. Delver got released with the Innistrad set. It's essentially a 1 mana creature that comes into the battlefield at the beginning of our upkeep. We have to look at the top card of our library, and if we reveal an instant or sorcery spell, we get to flip it and we get a 3/2 flyer in replacement. Definitely overall a good card. But the mono blue Delver deck is another deck that's still pretty good in the current standard meta. Overall, it's playing a balance of spells and stuff like that, just to kind of be as aggressive as possible, and playing a lot of creatures that fly in and a lot of tempo with cards to kind of slow down whatever your opponent is doing. The only other cards that we really lost in the deck as a whole are really only 2 cards, and one of it being Ascendant Spirit, another card that kind of helped grow as the game went on. If we had open snow mana, we could always pump it into this creature, making it bigger over time, and then eventually get into the 4 mana one where it becomes a 4/4, and then every we get to put 2+1/+1 counters on it, and then whenever this creature deals damage to a player, draw a card. And we also lost Jwari Disruption, which I don't think is the biggest of deals because you can easily find some other counter spells that you could put in instead. I chose to make it disappear if we wanted to, with the possibility of having to sacrifice a creature to get the Casualty 1 ability. Other than that, it's still a 2 mana counter target spell unless it's controller pays 2, and it's slightly an improvement over Jwari Disruption because it counter target spells unless the controller pays 1. The downfall is we can't play it as a mana source into the battlefield tapped. But other than that, the thing I kind of felt like could replace the Ascendant Spirit is going to be Ledger Shredder. It's kind of a card that is a very tempo friendly card because every time a player plays their second spell each turn, it connives, which allows us to draw a card and discard a card, and if we discard a non-land card, we get to pump one of our creatures with a +1/+1 counter. And I think in a deck where we're trying to tempo out our opponent by getting a lot of evasive flying damage in the air, getting rid of spells that maybe not effective against whatever our opponent's playing, this deck could definitely be a top performer because it is a very good tempo, kind of keeping the game in your favor because we are being more reactive than anything of trying to be aggressive. We can attack in, but then we kind of hold our mana open to maybe counter target spell, get something in on our opponent's upkeep, their turn with like a flash spell like a Spectral Adversary. Definitely a very interesting deck. Definitely a deck that is performing very well now, and because I really only lost 2 cards from the main deck with rotation, I think this is definitely another deck that could still perform very, very well because not many pieces have really gotten removed from the deck as a whole. And I even think the pieces I added are, if not equivalent, they may be slightly better because I do think Ledger Shredder is going to be that card you're going to see a lot of in any deck that splashes blue and plays a little bit of that tempo-y aggro style of Magic. Next deck up here on the list is a deck list that, I feel like because Naya Runes is the more popular version, is Selesnya Enchants. It's definitely a deck that I feel like at one point was kind of another popular enchantment style deck. Enchantments is definitely a good deck. The Runes is slightly better because it makes your creatures more aggressive and allows us to kind of cheat them out on the battlefield in a cheaper way using Jukai Naturalist and the Dwarf that searches our library for our graveyard for runes and allows us to kind of get back runes or get a rune into our hand and be able to play it. But overall, this is another deck list that's actually still relatively good in the sense that it's also not a very expensive deck list. Outside of, I think, the lands and maybe a couple rares in the main deck, this deck list performs definitely very, very well. It doesn't cost a lot of commons and uncommons and rares and mythics to really build. For the most part, in its current form, the only rares are in the deck are going to be your Weaver of Harmony, your Kami of Transcience, and also, I think, your Overgrown Farms. The rest of the deck is all uncommons and commons. And the cards that the deck lost are essentially just Rune of Might and also Branch, the green-white pathway. So definitely another deck list that, like I said, didn't really lose a lot of pieces. All I really did was add some additional basics to make up for the pathways. Other than that, I also added in Rafine's Guidance, a 1 mana enchant aura that gives target creature +1/+1, and then we can cast it from our graveyard rather than paying 3 mana rather than paying its mana cost. So definitely, a way to get a aura back from the graveyard. Is it going to be as good as a Rune of Might? Probably not. But yet again, a way to reoccur a rune from the graveyard if our creature does get removed is definitely very, very good. The rest of the pieces, like I said, are from the newer sets. We have a lot of Kamigawa cards. We have a little bit of Crimson Vow here, but most of the deck is a Kamigawa deck with a splash of some other things. The Rafine's Guidance is from Streets of New Capenna, but the rest of the deck is definitely a good budget deck. It's definitely a deck that performs very, very well in current meta with those 2 other cards. But I do think, we will miss the ability to give things trample with an aura. But other than that, I think the deck is going to be still very competitive. You combine something like Mashako's Reign of Truth with all the auras we play in this deck. You can definitely swing it for some big damage very, very quickly. And overall, just be aggressive against your opponent as a whole. Still a good deck list to maybe look into possibly building, and prepare kind of for that rotation and not really break the bank in the process. So this next deck up on the list is a Naya Humans deck. Naya Humans is definitely a good deck. It's a deck that actually, surprisingly, as much as it seems like it plays a lot of mono white, really doesn't play a lot of older cards in the main deck when it comes to creatures and spells and things like that. Most of the cards that are in this deck are really coming from the mana sources, and that's the one thing that may be felt the most when it comes to these decks. like this, especially like a Naya humans deck. Does it go from like a Naya aggro deck to more of a Naya mid-range deck? That's one of those things we'll kind of see, and how like the mana bases and things like that change when we lose pathways and things like that. But for the most part, the majority of the cards that we lost in the deck are, you know, Luminarch Aspirant, we lost Elite Spellbinder, we lost Minx, which I guess is a good card, but it's not a card that was necessary for the deck to really work. And then we lost Cave of the Frost Dragon and both of the pathways here. You know, overall, it's definitely a list that you can try to throw some other humans into. You know, there's probably not going to be an easy replacement for an Elite Spellbinder and a Luminarch Aspirant, but you can definitely play some other cards to kind of, you know, be aggressive in other senses and kind of keep the human tribal thing going. A couple cards I added to the deck that definitely, you know, I feel like could be an improvement because, you know, it makes the deck a little bit more aggressive, is I actually added in some Reckless Stormseeker. It's a human werewolf, and at the beginning of our combat each turn, we get to put a +1/+0 on target creature, and it gains haste on the turn. It allowed us to be a little bit more aggressive. And then I also added in Torin's Fist of the Angels. Yet again, another cool card here that I feel like doesn't see a lot of play, but maybe we'll see play in the future. But it's a 3-mana 2/2 with Train In. Then whenever we cast a creature spell, we create a 1/1 green-white human creature soldier token with Train In, which is definitely a pretty cool ability, especially in a human's deck. You know, it allows us to kind of get wider on our opponent and be aggressive in that sense, and kind of combine that with like Sigarda, Champion of the Light, and possibly Helena and Elena Partners. Definitely could be an interesting deck list to be said regardless. I mean, we still have cards like Thalia here to kind of tax our opponent's non-creature spells. We have ways to kind of remove things because Brutal Cathar is still in the deck. It doesn't get rotated out. We have Sun Gold Sentinel here, which is definitely another good human soldier in the deck. I can't remember if I actually added this into the deck or if this was already in the deck. We had, again, another good 2-drop for a 3/2, and it starts, you know, it does some graveyard hate in the process. But overall, this is yet again a list that is, you know, kind of prominent here. It does lose a couple key pieces, I think, in the deck as a whole, but I don't think, you know, it's going to be completely gone, as we'd still be very aggressive even in the aggro/mid game of the deck. But yet again, a cool deck to kind of try out, maybe play around with, maybe try to play around with some other humans that are currently in the format, and maybe figure out which cards you like and which cards you don't like from the main list. Now, the last deck up on the list is, yet again, it's the most popular deck here in the format, and that is Boros Burn. You know, a lot of cards that we lost in the deck aren't anything that's of big significance. Some of them are a little bit of big significance in the sense of the lands are kind of like, we lose some of our more favorable lands that we don't have to worry about coming to the battlefield tapped. We lost Luminarch Aspirant, which is kind of a way to help our cards get modified, and we kind of lost our big damage with Royal Eruption. But I do think, you know, I found some cards that could definitely, you know, do the trick to kind of hold the deck over and kind of still be pretty decent regardless. One card I actually added into the deck is the Sun Gold Sentinel. I think it's a pretty decent 2-drop. That's a 3/2. You know, it pairs pretty well with the Hopeful Initiate, as it allows, you know, Hopeful Initiate to train if we attack him with both of these. It also has Coven as well, allows us to get some evasive damage in the later game if we can get the Coven ability to trigger. Another card I added in here to kind of replace our removal of the Royal Eruption was Kami's Flare. It's another interesting spell that I think saw prominence when Kamigawa first launched. It kind of fell out to the wayside. But Kami's Flare deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and Kami's Flare also deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller if you control a modified creature. And we are playing a deck that's going to help modify our creatures, though we do lose Luminarch Aspirant, like I said. But we do have other ways of putting +1/+1 counters on things that we do control. So definitely a card that can replace Royal Eruption because we are playing modified creatures, to say the least. And another card I actually thought that was definitely pretty cool, and I think I saw a couple lists actually splash this in, and it's going to be Angelfire Ignition, as it's a way just to directly modify one of our creatures, giving it +2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. The creature will gain Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste in end of turn. So just turn any of our creatures into just a big destructive spell that's going to, you know, swing a bunch of life our way and take out a bunch of your opponent's life in one swinging process. And then we can flash it back in the later game as long as they can't, you know, hate it out of the graveyard for 4 mana and do it all over again. Definitely an interesting list. Definitely a list that I feel like you could possibly even see in current standard. Like I said, you know, we'll kind of see what the effects of, you know, like say losing a Luminarch Aspirant in an aggro deck that plays white, if it's going to be that big of a deal. You know, it's definitely one of those things that when you play, you know, a white deck, you know, it does help, you know, make the deck a little bit that much more aggressive, because, you know, you put a counter on either itself or another creature, allowing us to kind of get in for some, you know, additional damage early in the game, which could help in the later game because that 1 point of damage could matter. But over the course, you know, it's going to be one of those things that will kind of wait and see as the meta develops. But like I said, this is yet again another list. For the most part, a lot of the cards were more current, post rotation cards outside those couple cards. But overall, still a pretty good list. I could, like I said, see this list in current standard play. The mana base, we'll see what happens with the return to Dominaria, kind of see, what they'll introduce, because, we're going back to Dominaria. What does that mean for mana bases? Are we going to get any special lands that kind of go along with that Dominaria kind of deck? But overall, like I said, the mana base will probably be the biggest, problem with a lot of decks that are more on the aggressive side, because the pathways do help you be a little bit more aggressive, as you can choose the mana color you need and then kind of go from there. But if you're interested in any of these deck lists, I'll leave them down in the links below if you want to try them out, play test them, maybe make your own adjustments and tweaks, and kind of give me some feedback that way. Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, hit that like button. I'll probably over the course of the next couple months, as we're kind of go into a dry spell with standard, as we're not getting anything over the summer, I'll probably look at other decks and maybe try to make some other more rotation proof decks as we get closer and closer to September. But hit that like button, it definitely helps out the channel. If you're new here, you want to post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video. I would just like to take a quick moment and thank the supporters of the channel. You yourself can also become a supporter of the channel simply by clicking the join button below this video. Any support definitely helps and goes a long way, helps me with making content here on the channel.